We always think the wilderness is empty at 2 a.m., a silent sanctuary of pine trees and starlight. But the truth is far more terrifying. The woods are never truly empty, and sometimes, you aren't the only one trying to hide in the dark. The heatwave in upstate New York was brutal that July, so when my parents suggested a last-minute road trip to the Adirondacks, my best friend Chloe and I jumped at the chance. The plan was simple: drive up, hit the massive theme park near Lake George, and spend the night camping under the stars. But we made one critical mistake. We didn't book a campsite in advance. By the time our dusty SUV rolled into the town, every single commercial campground was completely packed due to a massive regional youth baseball tournament. Desperate and exhausted after an 8-hour drive, my dad pulled over into a gravel clearing inside a dense national forest reserve. It was a secluded, primitive parking lot surrounded by towering timber, with a narrow trail leading down to an isolated beach known as Echo Lake. A passing hiker told us it was a safe spot to park overnight, so we decided to pitch our tents right there on the gravel. There were 2 tents, one for my parents, and one for Chloe and me, pitched just a few feet apart. As we set up camp in the fading twilight, I noticed a beaten-up, rusted sedan parked at the far end of the lot. It looked completely abandoned, its windows covered in grime. I shrugged it off, assuming it belonged to someone out on a long night hike. By 11 p.m., my parents were fast asleep, their heavy breathing echoing softly from their tent. Chloe and I were huddled in ours, scrolling through TikTok and whispering about the roller coasters we were going to ride the next day. But just past midnight, a sharp, metallic sound shattered the silence. Clang. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy steel shovel being slammed down onto the gravel right near the abandoned car. Chloe froze, her eyes widening in pure terror. We held our breath, sitting paralyzed in the pitch black. Then came the scraping sound of something heavy being dragged, followed by a dull thud as the shovel was thrown into a car trunk. The trunk slammed shut with terrifying force. Seconds later, the rusted sedan's engine roared to life, its tires spraying gravel as it violently sped out of the parking lot into the night. Shaken, I frantically texted a friend who lived in a nearby town, telling him where we were. My phone buzzed a minute later with a text that turned my blood to ice: "Get out of there right now." Echo Lake is notorious for local gang drop-offs and illegal activity. A body was found buried near that beach last spring. Before I could even process the text, a sound tore through the woods that will haunt me until the day I die. It was a loud, blood-curdling, agonized scream of a grown man, cutting right through the trees from the direction of the beach. Terrified, I called my mom's phone inside the next tent to wake her up. She answered in a sleepy daze. I whispered fiercely that someone was screaming, but since she hadn't heard it, she tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a wild animal or teenagers partying. Chloe and I crawled under our sleeping bags, tears streaming down our faces. 10 minutes passed in agonizing silence. Then, the real nightmare began. Crunch. 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 Stealthy, deliberate footsteps were circling our tent. Someone was walking on the gravel, right outside the thin nylon wall. I reached down and turned off my phone screen so the light wouldn't betray us. My heart was beating so violently I was certain the intruder could hear it. The footsteps paused outside our tent, moved slowly over to my parents' tent, and then circled our parked SUV. Suddenly, high beams cut through the fabric of our tent. The rusted sedan had returned. The heavy footsteps rushed toward the vehicle, a car door slammed, and the sedan tore away once more. 5 minutes later, blue and red flashing lights illuminated the trees. A state trooper vehicle was tearing down the road, chasing after them. Chloe and I spent the rest of the night locked inside our SUV, staring blankly into the tree line until dawn. When morning broke, my mom admitted she had also awakened to the footsteps and heard a terrifying, heavy, ragged breathing right outside her tent scream. We packed our gear in under 5 minutes and fled. Later that week, local news confirmed that police had intercepted a vehicle connected to a violent cartel retaliation night at Echo Lake. If we had pitched our tents down on that beach instead of the parking lot, we would have walked right into an active execution ground. Summer camp is supposed to be a place of freedom, campfires, and lifelong friendships. But when you're isolated deep in the Appalachian Mountains, you realize that the thin cabin doors aren't there to keep nature out, they're the only thing keeping the monsters inside away from you. In the summer of 2018, right before I entered the 8th grade, I went to Camp Cherokee in North Carolina. It was my third summer there, and I absolutely loved it. I got along with everyone, except for a new counselor hired that year named Art. Art was in his mid-50s, with stark white hair, weathered, leathery skin, and cold, unblinking eyes. It was incredibly weird seeing a 50-year-old camp counselor. Every other counselor was a college kid in their early 20s. Rumors quickly spread through the camp. One of the older girls whispered that Art had been abruptly fired from his previous job for violently stalking a female co-worker, but because Camp Cherokee was desperately short-staffed that year, they hadn't run a proper background check. The most unsettling thing about him, though, was his knuckles. They were always raw, scraped up, and covered in bloody scabs. Whenever someone asked, he had a different excuse: "Oh, just tripped near the woodpile," or "caught it in my truck door." The first sign of his unhinged nature happened during a free play night. My bunkmates and I were playing tennis, and Art was standing right behind the chain-link fence, watching us with a bizarre, frozen grin. It wasn't a warm smile, his eyes remained completely dead while his mouth stretched wide. A stray tennis ball rolled past the fence to his feet. My friend Tyler politely called out, "Hey Art, could you toss that back?" Art didn't just toss it. He wound up his arm and threw the tennis ball with terrifying, professional velocity. It blasted into the chain-link fence barely an inch from Tyler's left ear, making the entire metal structure rattle violently. Art let out a sharp, unsettling, "Got to keep your eye on the ball, kid," he muttered. We laughed nervously, trying to convince ourselves he just didn't know his own strength. But deep down, we knew better. A few nights later, I was walking out of the communal bathhouse after a late shower. I noticed an expensive canister of shaving cream sitting on the counter. Being a 13-year-old who hadn't even started shaving yet, I curiously picked it up to read the label. Suddenly, two massive, calloused hands gripped my upper arms from behind. The fingers dug so deeply into my muscles that I gasped in pain. I spun around to find Art's face barely inches from mine. His expression was full of absolute, psychotic malice. He leaned in, his breath hot against my face, and hissed a string of horrific profanities. Then, his voice dropped to a cold whisper, "I am never going to have you touch my belongings again. You got that?" "Yes," I choked out, completely terrified. "You touch my stuff again, and I will break both of your arms," Art said, his grip tightening until I bruised. "And then I'll tell everyone you fell off the high dive at the lake. Do we understand each other?" He snatched the shaving cream and walked out into the night as if nothing had happened. I stood there shivering in my towel, too embarrassed and terrified to tell a soul. The climax of Art's madness came the following Tuesday. It was Art's night off, which was a massive relief to me. Around 11:30 p.m., as my bunk was settling in after an outdoor movie night, a chorus of high-pitched screams echoed from the waterfront. It sounded like an entire cabin of young girls screaming in absolute terror, accompanied by a man's frantic, enraged shouting. Two of our cabin counselors grabbed flashlights and ran into the darkness to investigate. They didn't return for nearly 2 hours. The next morning at the dining hall, the horrific truth came out. A cabin of 7-year-old girls had been walking the long path back from the campfire past the equipment shed. There, under the dim security light, they witnessed a bloodbath. Art had broken into the staff lockers to steal personal items on his night off. Eli, the 20-year-old head tennis instructor and universally loved counselor, had walked in and caught him red-handed. Art didn't hesitate. He tackled Eli to the gravel and began brutally beating his face with clenched fists. When the little girls turned the corner, Art was sitting on top of a semi-conscious Eli, repeatedly smashing his fists down, covered in blood, screaming over and over again like a broken record, "Don't touch my things. Don't touch my things." It took 3 grown male counselors to physically drag Art off Eli. Even with 3 men pinning him down, Art was snarling and swinging wildly. When the state police finally arrived and dragged him away in handcuffs, Art was looking back at the crying children, smiling a calm, pleasant smile. Eli was rushed to the emergency room with a shattered nose, an orbital bone fracture, a severe concussion, and dozens of stitches. A week later, I finally gathered the courage to tell the camp director about the threat in the bathroom. They called the state troopers, who added my testimony to the criminal file. It turned out Art was a deeply dangerous felon hiding out at summer camps. To this day, I can still feel the phantom grip of his bruised fingers on my arms, a reminder of how close I came to being his victim. We buy curtains for privacy, thinking a thin piece of fabric keeps the outside world out. But when you live on the ground floor, you realize fabric doesn't protect you, it just conceals the predator standing 2 inches away, recording you while you sleep. Recently, I moved into a ground floor apartment bordering an isolated golf course in Columbus, Ohio. Because of the hill layout, my bedroom and living room windows sat barely 6 inches above the grass outside, directly facing a dark, heavily wooded trail. Our creepy neighbor from the adjacent street, a middle-aged man who walked a Shih Tzu, always stared at me. My brother, who lived on the second floor, warned me that he often saw this man wandering into our complex yard at 1 a.m., walking dangerously close to my glass windows. One rainy night, I was sleeping on the living room couch when my dog, Bella, started growling furiously at the window. I looked up. A solid black mass was blocking out the distant streetlights through my thin beige curtains. Someone was standing right there. I frantically grabbed the TV remote and turned it off. The bright flash of the screen illuminated the glass. Through the fabric, I saw the clear silhouette of a man in a dark hoodie, crouched down, pressing his face flat against the glass to peer inside. He bolted into the woods when he realized I woke up. Months later, an elderly neighbor caught the same man pressed against my window at 2 a.m., holding up his smartphone, steadily recording video straight into my dark apartment. I immediately installed heavy security cameras. If I had left that window cracked open for a summer breeze, the only thing between that monster and my bed would have been a flimsy bug screen.